Okay, we are most definitely in the home stretch of the engine build for my 2056 Type 4. With the case pretty much done, it's onto the fuel system, the injectors, and the rails.
So these are the injectors I'm going to use. The green top ones aren't really available, and if you do find them, they're super expensive and old. So I'm going with the FJ67s. Okay, so to get these ready to be installed, first we have to do is to put the bracket on, and then we'll take the large seal and stretch the large seal over the injector. This bracket is what holds it against the car, keeps it tight, and then this smaller seal goes over the business end, and that just kind of pushes into the intake. So we'll orient this correctly and get it on the car. Alright, so you can see that I've already done the other one here. Now, make sure that this is nice and clean. Pop it on. Now, as I tighten this down, you see that the bracket pulls the injector into the engine. Now we put some clamps on. And then this is one of the fuel rails here. So, get it in one. And make sure you use the correct clamps here. You don't want like a worm drive clamp, because it will eat into the rubber. You want fuel injection clamp, like this. I'm making a little mark for how far down the hose needs to go, so there's no guesswork.
I used high-pressure ethanol-safe hose to plumb the system. It's a pretty simple loop. Fuel enters the passenger side rail, then through the number 3 and number 4 injectors, then across to the driver's side rail, feeding number 2 with a split to the cold start injector, then the number 1 injector, then the pressure regulator, which should keep this D-jet system at 29 psi, and finally back to the return line to the gas tank.
Now, it's a good idea to just inspect the whole valve chamber. Make sure that the pushrod tube clips are on the tubes themselves, not contacting the rods, which they are. Everything's in a good spot. And because this is going to be my first startup, this is my last chance to really get some lube in here. Now to put everything back together, see this logo here? Keep it upside down, because that supposedly makes these covers less prone to leaking. Then you take a pry bar or anything really that gives you leverage. And that's it. Alright, so I'm going to put in one of these 1, 2, 3 distributors. It's all electronic and Bluetooth controllable. So we'll swap out this antique and get this puppy in.
Before pulling the old distributor, I've set the engine to top dead center on number 1 so I can line things up.
Right, out with the old and in with the new. Comes with this spacer, which I assume needs to go here so that the distributor sits as the right height. Alright, so here's the clamp. We'll get that over the O-ring gently, because I want to tear it. Okay, so we have our distributor, our spacer, and our clamp.
Now I didn't shoot putting the spring into the hole, I forgot. But it's an important thing to keep the drive from bouncing. The spring just goes into the hole and then the distributor goes down on top of it.
Now what we'll do is orient this so that the wires are in a workable position. Then we'll make sure that the clamp goes down in the right spot. And now we'll just kind of like push the distributor down just to get the O-ring to seat properly. Now we'll move the rotor until we get to a place where, where it's locked. And you know that that's pretty much where top dead center was before. I know that I'm still at top dead center because of that. And when I pulled the distributor, that's where we were. So we're in good shape there. I'll put a nut on this, and then once we've got some power rolling to the unit, we'll rotate it till the green light shows up through one of these little holes here, and we'll get our static timing set.
The 123 distributor comes with simple instructions about wiring and setting static timing. They have a bunch of different models, so just follow the instructions for your engine.
And then we just have our distributor cap, which has a notch on it, so that can really only go one way. Put our clips on. There we go. Okay, now we got to wire it up. And I have the D-Jet model, so I've got these two extra wires. They go into the injection harness. But these are going to go to the coil, the black and red, and the blue is a ground. I want to make sure that I leave enough free wire without having it be too long. I can always coil it up later. If we're not, that's a problem. So now I'll put some connectors. Alright, got a good crimp. We'll do that with the black one. And the blue I might put a ring terminal on because that's just going to be grounded to the case. Alright, now we'll just get our coil set up. I got this one also from 123 Ignition. So I know it is compatible with their distributor. So looking at the back of the engine, this is cylinder 1, even says so on the tin. 2, 3, and 4. So the firing order goes 1, 4, 3, 2. And it says so right there, although I have it upside down.
Now it's on to the injector harness. You'll definitely want to follow a diagram to make sure everything is plugged in to the right connectors. If your harness is cracked and stiff, you'll probably save yourself a lot of troubleshooting and heartache by just getting a new one.
And now it's time to put the vacuum hoses on the engine. And I got this as a kit. It comes with a diagram. Jeff Bowlesby also has a great diagram for this. What's nice about this kit is it's got some green hoses like they originally came from the factory. Just put these on and hopefully get this ready to put the engine in the car. This is the hose that goes to the MPS, super important hose.
With all the hoses and wiring done, I'm finally ready to take the engine off the stand. The first thing I'll do is take the shop crane and raise the engine up a little bit so that I can pull the engine stand off the yoke, just like that. And now the engine is balanced on the shop crane. I find that if I put the straps in the front like this and a chain around the yoke in the back, the engine balances pretty evenly. Now what I'll do is lower the engine on the crane a little bit onto a board so that I can remove the yoke and start to put the transmission back together and mate it to the engine. Now it's kind of heavy, but it is a one-man job. And what I'll do is just align the holes on the transmission with the studs on the engine. And then you may have to jiggle it a little bit to get everything lined up. Then I'll just tighten the bolts in a crisscross pattern so that everything's equal and put the starter in. Now the starter has a nut on the bottom of it that holds one side of it. That's the easy part. And then on the top there's a bolt that goes through the case that you have to thread through. And this one's a little bit too long for my taste, but I'll change it out once I drop the engine the next time. There's also a little stop against the starter to keep the nut from turning. Draining all the old transmission fluid out. You can see how I do that in this link right here. It's a separate video. The final piece of engine tin. These little tabs go over the transmission. And once that's all set, I'll go up on the crane once again, lift the engine up high enough to pull the board out, and then slip the jack with the tangerine jack plate on it underneath the engine so that I can lower the engine down onto it and get it ready to go into the car. This jack plate makes it really easy to move the engine around and get it just into the perfect position. The engine bar and transmission are bolted in, and it's time for the exhaust.
All right, here's an exhaust gasket. Here's matte gas, and we're going to anneal this by getting it to like cherry red and then letting it cool down. Makes the copper softer.
Unfortunately, something happened to the footage of the actual heat exchanger install, but it's pretty straightforward. The keys are making sure those copper gaskets are seated properly in the head. I used a little assembly grease to hold them up there. And that the sealing surfaces on the heat exchangers are perfectly flat. I used a file across both tubes to do that. Then when bolting the exchangers into the car, I left them kind of a little loose until I was sure the tubes were properly centered on the copper gaskets. The muffler then goes on with the bracket which attaches to the transmission, and 3 bolts on each side with the gasket in between.
Now I'll plug in the alternator harness. Alright, get this velcroed up here. And then this is the ignition harness. It's super important here that we line up these pins properly with these, because if you're off by one, you will fry this harness, and that is not fun. So let's lay it out. It's 1 to 1. And just press it in. You can feel it on the sides. It's definitely lined up. And finally, the fuel injection harness, which goes right there. That's it. Okay, now that the engine's in the car, you got to get some brake-in oil in there. I'm going to put 4 quarts of this stuff. It's recommended by Jake Raby. And now under the car, I'll get the starter hooked up. And that's pretty much it. Now the car is ready to see the light of day once again. Wow, it looks a lot different now than it did before it went into the garage the first time. It's really cool to get it out into daylight. And my son is going to do the honors and turn the car over for the first time. Well, that's not working. Let's see if we can give it another try. At this point, I'm pretty bummed it's not starting. I checked for air, fuel, and spark, and discovered that the engine wasn't getting any gas. So in a way, this was kind of good news. It wasn't anything mysterious. Well, it turns out I swapped the terminals on the pump, so it was sucking instead of pumping, literally. Okay, 3rd time's a charm. Success. And I love it that my son is covering his head because he thinks it's going to explode. It might. Man, there is nothing like that first start and hearing the engine roaring to life. I ran the engine at about 2,500 RPM for 20 minutes to break in the cam, and I'm using Joe Gibbs break-in oil for this. Now for the 20-minute break-in period to hold 2,500 RPM, a zip tie is your friend. Well, she is alive. I'm impressed with how the 123 distributor is working without any adjustment, but now the dialing in begins. I'm sending the car to a local shop for an alignment before getting it on the road. Yes, I know I can do it myself, but I've done so much on this car that I'd like someone else to proof my work on the dangerous bits and also make sure I didn't forget something important and do the alignment. If you like these videos, please give them a thumbs up and subscribe. There are lots more to come. Thanks again to 914 Rubber for supplying so many great parts for this build. Also to Jake Raby for being so generous with his knowledge about Type 4 engines. Thanks for watching. Be safe and enjoy.